There was a story told on Sunday which bears repeating. There was the reminder that it's been suggested that every character, every symbol, and every archetype in every story represents an aspect of our self, our psyche. So live this story. Recognize the elements that are our self and see what it brings up for us. That story about a king who had 3 sons, but he also had an only daughter who was as precocious as she was beautiful, and he adored her, fulfilling her every whim, her every desire, so that she became vain and self-centered, loving to sit in front of the mirror, preening herself in the jewelry and the garments that her father indulged her with. Often her brothers and her mother, the queen, would admonish her. They would tease her, but she would immediately run to her father to seek solace and for any desire that she would want. And the years passed until she came to the age of 17 years old, and her father called to her and said, "Now it is time for you to be married. I am inviting the princes from all the realms from whom you can choose your husband." Well, she dared not put on her tantrums in front of her father, but in private, and to her mother and her brothers and to the servants, she stamped her feet, saying, "I don't want to get married. My father takes care of me well enough." But the princes were invited, and from behind the screen, behind which all women had to stand, the princes were paraded as they were invited in for the feasting that the king provided. But the princess called Shirin took no notice of any of these princes at all, and in private she continued to stamp her feet and put on tantrums, saying that her father, who loved her, and she'd had no need to choose a husband. But one day, after her mother, the queen, had been in and scolded her and begged her to make that choice, and Shirin putting on another one of her tantrums, her mother stomping out in anger and frustration. But Shirin left to herself in her chamber. Suddenly the room went dark, and a light appeared which grew and grew into a beautiful, shimmering being dressed in emerald. And this being spoke in the most mellifluous voice, like the sound of the wind rustling the trees in springtime. And the being said to her, "Shirin, Shirin, you will never be fulfilled in life if you remain under the wings of your father. You must choose a husband." And Shirin, in defiance, stamped her feet and said, "But I don't want to. My father takes care of me. Why should I get married?" And the shining being, with that, took Shirin's hand and led her over to the window. And in that moment it seemed a spotlight fell on a handsome man astride a grey stallion in the courtyard below. And the shining being said, there, Shirin is the one who loves you and will take care of you. His name is Imran Khan." And with that the room grew light again, and the shining being disappeared. The very next day, the feast was prepared, the day when Shirin had to choose her husband-to-be. And from behind the screen, when the princes were paraded, she pointed to the one that the beautiful being had shown her and said, "Who is that?" And the response was Imran Khan. And she said, "He is the one I will marry." So when this was told to the king was greatly pleased, because indeed this was the prince he himself would choose, a fine, upstanding young man. So the wedding was prepared, and a great feast was set out, after which Imran Khan took his new bride, Shirin, back to his own kingdom. Well, at first she was totally indulged, her every wish fulfilled, the servants and her relatives dancing attention on her. But it soon became evident that she was narcissistic, demanding, spoiled, and petulant. Her husband, being disgruntled with her behavior, was brought to the point where he spoke to her, scolding her, said, "You are now a married woman and must act with responsibility and caring." But her behavior continued until the love that her husband had for her waned, and he took to going on many hunting trips and going to far-flung places, almost ignoring her. But then, one day, again, the room went dark, and the shining being appeared before Shirin once again and said to her, "Why are you so unhappy?" And Shirin said, "I don't love him. I don't know how to love him." "Oh," said the shining being, and taking what we would consider to be a wand that she had in her hand, she tapped Shirin on the chest, and there was a distinct and a resonating sound of ting, ting, ting. "Oh," said the shining being, "your heart has been turned to glass." Shirin burst into tears and said, Why is my heart made of glass? I want to love." And the shining being said, "This often happens when we spend too much time in front of the mirror, our image is taken from us, and our heart or other parts of our soul are turned to glass. Shirin wept and asked, "What can I do? What must I do to love?" Shining Being said, "It will not be easy. You must do exactly what I say." Tell me," said Shirin. "I will do it." The Shining Being said, "You must discard all the jewels and gems and finery and silk and satin. Wear simple garb. Do even what your servants do. You must remain mute, unspeaking, for at least 3 moons. You must fulfill your husband's every desire. Only then is it possible that your glass heart will shatter. So then the light again filling the room, the Shining Being disappeared. But from that moment on, Shirin discarded her jewels, her gems, her finery, dressed simply, began to act as her servants did, taking care and being aware of others. She fulfilled her husband's desires even before he asked. But being mute, it was thought that she had some malady, some incurable illness. In fact, it was thought that she may have gone mad. Now, even though the love that her husband had for her had waned, being the caring soul that he was, he felt great compassion for her and wished to find a cure. He sent for physicians from all around the land, but they were not able to make her speak. But then he heard of a famous physician, Dr. Sage, who lived in a far distant place. So he decided that he would make this journey to bring back this physician in the hope that he could cure his wife. Well, Imran Khan had his grey stallion saddled and was in the courtyard, ready to take his leave to make the arduous and long journey, when in her chamber, looking down and seeing her husband, Shirin, in that moment, dashed out of her room, down the stairs, and placing her hands on the stirrups of her husband's horse, she cried to him, "Please, please, do not go. I love you." And with that, there was what seemed to be a clearly audible sound of a shattering Shirin told the story to her husband from beginning to end of what had happened, and they realized that her glass heart had indeed been shattered. Imran Khan took his wife in his arms and carried her back into their palace, where from that moment on they lived in loving harmony for the rest of their days. What is the deep meaning? What are the elements of this story that we can relate to? Do you still have that which in you, which is closed, caged, hidden, brittle, glass? What hurt, pain in our lives has caused some part of ourselves to close, turn to glass? And what is it in this story that tells us what is needed to shatter that citadel?